kids with ADHD, sensory issues, and the adults who have extremely black and white thinking around sensory issues. Before we get started, this video is going to be a little longer than my typical video because I need to provide a lot of context here because there's a segment of adults who watch my videos who tend to have rigid black or white thinking where they tend to hear things in extremes. One of my professional mentors is an occupational therapist who I learned a great deal from. She is the person who really taught me a lot about unstructured play and how unstructured play helps to develop executive functioning. In fact, my How to Do Recess group that I designed for elementary schoolers is really based on everything that she taught me. Years ago, I asked her, why is it that every kid with ADHD who sees an occupational therapist seems to get diagnosed with sensory processing disorder? And here was her answer. Number one, they shouldn't be. And number two, because the younger generation of occupational therapists are not being trained correctly, meaning they're not being taught to look at ADHD holistically. They're only being taught to look at it through this narrow lens of sensory processing disorder. Now, she is not talking about every single OT, but what she meant is there is a change in the training that many OTs are receiving, which is causing this. In the years since I've started ADHD Dude, one of the themes that I've seen repeatedly is there's a segment of adults who often their first interaction with a professional for their child was an occupational therapist, and these adults tend to see everything through the lens of sensory issues. And what I find is they often have difficulty understanding how anything pertaining to their child's behavior or emotional regulation or social skills might not be related to their child's sensory issues. Every single thing pertaining to their child has to do with sensory issues. To be honest, I find that those adults are really unreachable because they're not willing to hear that maybe not everything is about sensory issues. I do want to mention my son, who is now an adult, had many sensory issues as a child, and as an adult, he still has some sensory issues. He still cannot deal with real loud music. He still has some sensory issues around food. So I do very much believe in sensory issues because I see, from my own son that he still has some of them today. So I don't want to minimize this, and I'm not trying to discount it. My point with bringing this up is to say there's a segment of professionals and parents who only see children with ADHD through this very narrow lens of sensory issues. And they're not looking at a child holistically. They're not looking at it through the lens of executive functioning or anything else. And when people do that, I think it really limits their ability to help a child because everything goes back to sensory issues. And if you want me to be completely honest, I find those adults unreachable because often what I find is they're not willing to learn because they're not willing to hear anything else. I feel very fortunate that I had a lot of exposure to different fields because I learned early on that I wasn't finding what I needed in the mental health field, which is what led me to the speech language pathology field, which is where I learned all about social skills and executive functioning. And then I was led to the occupational therapy field, which helped me learn about emotional regulation and sensory issues and some other things. So because I had exposure to these different fields, I feel that I was lucky enough to learn about things and how to look at things from these different angles and kind of incorporate it all together. So while I tend to look at things through a lens of executive functioning, because ADHD is an executive function developmental delay, I still do take all these different pieces into consideration because I think we need to look at kids holistically and not through one narrow, rigid lens. I hope this is helpful. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.